Before we get into the list, as usual, let's go over the criteria. 1. These rankings are just my opinion and based on my personal experiences. 2. This list is coming from a hardcore Nuzlocke perspective, so I'm assuming you're playing on set, you're not using healing items, you're using level caps, etc. 3. I'll be taking into account all of the possible encounters you could have before reaching the boss fight, and I'll of course consider the starter choice as well. Now let's very quickly go over the tiers. Run killer. Fights that will end your run without preparation at all. Tough. Good chance you have to sack at least one Pokemon, may lose a party member if not careful. Average. Shouldn't have any problems with at least a mild level of preparation. Easy. Easy fights in which basically no preparation is required for the most part. I'm not going to include a free tier because I don't believe that there's a single fight that's totally free in Emerald. Okay, I think we're all set. Let's do this. Contrary to popular opinion, I do not believe that Roxanne is just free in a hardcore Nuzlocke setting, unless you picked Mudkip. That is kind of the only instance in which gym number 1 becomes totally brainless. But with a level cap of 15, Torchic and even Trico both struggle with this fight. If you pick Torchic, you'll definitely need either Shroomish or Lombre in order to progress through this gym. And Trico by himself struggles against Nosepass, by the way, unless her AI messes up really bad and just spams Tackle instead of Rock Tomb, which honestly, now that I think about it, does happen quite a lot. If you picked Torchic and didn't get a Shroomish or a Lombre, then all of a sudden she gets put into Run Killer. Going into Brawly blind will definitely result in losing a few team members, but with a little planning, he's not that bad. Everyone has bulk up, which is always scary, and Vital Throw on his Makuhita hits really hard. What helps a lot are the amount of encounters you get before you reach Dewford that perform very well against him. You're almost guaranteed a Wurmple at some point, with both Beautifly and Dustox being very good against him. Dustox honestly makes the fight practically free, honestly, but without a strategy, his Pokemon are definitely capable of blindsiding you. I am much more conflicted with where to put Wattson on this list, but ultimately, I think he falls into average, maybe the low end of tough. If you choose Mudkip as your starter, he's free. If you choose Torchic, he's pretty easy, honestly. But if you chose Grovyle, depending on your encounters, he's definitely a run killer. Grovyle is pretty bad. There aren't many other options to use based on the encounters you do get. It's just that if you picked either Mudkip or Torchic and they're still alive, he's pretty easy. You have to plan a little more with a Combuskin, but I honestly don't think it's that bad. Definitely the very top tier of average, but you could put him into tough. I just don't see him as a run killer unless you picked a Trico. Thunder Waves are very annoying, and that Voltorb does have self-destruct. So Flannery is not that tough to beat, but I will say it is very hard not to lose at least one Pokemon to her. She will often use one of her useless Pokemon to get a Sunny Day up, as long as they aren't taken down in one hit, and then every other Pokemon has Overheat. Numel, Slugma, and Camerupt are usually not much of an issue. I think she would have been way scarier if that Camerupt had Magnitude or Rock Throw or something like that. The Torkoal is definitely a problem though. It's like extremely way bulkier than you think it is. Just for reference, most Marsh Stomps won't even deal half of its health and damage with a Soft Sand boosted Mudshot. And Gyarados doesn't get a water move at this point in the game either, so he's not helping much offensively. This Torkoal also gets White Herb, so its Overheat is almost always going to go off twice at full power. With that being said, you can get around that strategy by sacrificing one or two Pokemon you don't plan on using, and then Flannery becomes a lot easier when you do that. Torkoal is still a problem you need to plan for though, and if you don't, like I said, you'll lose at least one team member. Norman is really tough, especially if you don't have a protect strategy available for his slacking. In those cases, you could argue this is a run killer. His Spinda is surprisingly annoying as hell, and his Linoone has Belly Drum, which is obviously very scary. Do not let him pull that one off, or you will get crushed into the ground. The Vigoroth is probably his weakest Pokemon, but stab boosted Slash is obviously still something to worry about. Slacking requires a lot of prep as well if you're not using Protect, but if you do have a Pokemon with Protect, though, he's essentially free. I like using Dustox the most for this, because he comes with Poison Sting and Protect and Confusion, but any other Pokemon with Protect will eventually get the job done. Pelipper and Torkoal come to mind as well. But yeah, overall, definitely on the higher end of tough. He's definitely pretty close to being a run killer. Winona is the first run killer in my opinion, but not by much. The very low end of run killer perhaps. Her Swablu usually goes down in one hit, and Tropius is just a really bad Pokemon in general, so there's not much trouble there. Pelipper isn't too bad, but definitely an annoyance. But when you add Skarmory and Altaria to the mix, she just has one of the best teams defensively in the entire game. And based on those defensive typings, you don't really get an encounter before you reach her that deals with her effectively. Without an electric or a fire type, Skarmory is a real pain in the ass to deal with. But of course, the real reason she's in this tier is because of her Altaria. While I do think this Altaria is a little bit overrated, if you go into the fight without a plan to deal with the Dragon Dance Earthquake combo, you are going to die. There's just no other way around it. We're at the point in the list where we might start getting a little controversial. While definitely tougher than Wattson and Flannery, I just never saw anything crazy in Tate and Liza. I feel like it's a very unpopular opinion, maybe it's just me. The first two Pokemon that come out are their biggest threats, honestly, especially the Claydol with Earthquake and Ancient Power. But if you focused on the Claydol, especially right from the start, which you should have absolutely no issue with because at that point in the game, you should have a ton of water types to use, you're normally in the clear. Psychic types are just not that great in this generation, in my opinion at least. Also, other than Claydol and Solrock, the only damaging move left between their other Pokemon is Psychic. So if you find a way to wipe out those two quickly, you can just switch in two Dark types and then you basically just auto-win the game. I don't know, I've personally never had too much of an issue with them. I've definitely had more issues with Norman and Winona for sure, and others, which I'll talk about soon. Let me know in the comments what you think of that take, because I feel like I'm in the minority there. Juan is pretty tough, although would probably sit at the lower end of this tier. He has a team full of bulky water types, and there just aren't that many counters in the game that perform excellently against this type of team, other than Sceptile if you went with Trico as your starter. Yeah, if you do have Sceptile, this fight goes from tough to either average or easy. The Kingdra alone is what really makes this fight tough. With Double Team, Rest, and a Chesto Berry, I just don't know how you kill this thing effectively. If you don't plan for it, you probably just die. Outside of that, there isn't much that Juan does, but his Whiscash does have Earthquake. For the rival fights, I'm kinda going based off of every battle collectively, and honestly, they're not that good. Their starter never evolves completely. Every other Pokemon that they use is pretty bad. Like either the Pokemon are bad, or the Pokemon is good, like Ludicolo, but has a terrible moveset. Even their starter's moveset is really, really bad, despite that really being the only thing that you actually have to plan for. The fight on Route 10 is the hardest fight, honestly, and the only one that really requires any preparation for the most part. That's when their team is at their best. I honestly don't think that fight alone bumps them out of the easy tier, though. Definitely better than Roxanne and others in this tier, but definitely not better than the ones on average. I think in Emerald, you only fight Archie once in the Seafloor Cavern, and overall he's very underwhelming. As Crobat is the only Pokemon that you would have to plan for even a little bit, but honestly you could potentially get by without any prep whatsoever. If he gets lucky with Swaggers from either Mightyena or Sharpedo, then maybe that could be a problem. But honestly, with Mightyena's only attacking move being Takedown, and with Sharpedo being frailer than a Caterpie, I think this fight is just generally pretty easy. Maxie is definitely a little bit better than Archie, so I'll put him in average for now. The Camerupt is just much more of a threat than Archie's Sharpedo, and that's really what this comes down to. Actually, now that I'm looking at how this list is shaping up, I think he needs to be bumped down. I definitely find him to be much less threatening than the others in this average tier, actually. Definitely on the higher end of easy, though. Quickly ranking the admins for each team is going to be pretty simple. They are going below Archie, basically. They are all very easy. Honestly, a couple of them may even be easier than Roxanne. Yeah, Matt's team in particular is actually just garbage. Shelly is the biggest threat with Crunch on her Sharpedo, but that's still nothing crazy to worry about. Another hot take. I think Wally's team is a bona fide run killer. Every time I approach Victory Road and I look up this fight again, I'm always a little bit worried. Opens up with Dragon Dance Altaria, Thunderball and Magneton, Calm Mind Double Team on Gardevoir. It's just a lot. Even Delcatty and Roselia are still annoying as hell with Sing Charm and Toxic Leech Seed. It's also a fight that I feel like most of us forget about, because he does just come out of nowhere as soon as you enter Victory Road, basically. And you don't battle him ever throughout your journey. You fight him once just before the third badge or the level 16 Ralt, and that's it. And then boom, he just comes out of nowhere on Victory Road like, oh hey, remember me? Anyway, I do think he deserves this tier though. Very, very scary fight. Especially if you get caught off guard and forget the fight is actually there. Time for the Elite Four. Sidney is super average. He swapped his Sharpedo with a Crawdon in Emerald, which is a big downgrade, honestly. And basically every other team member outside of Absol is not very good at all. Cacturne may be the worst Pokemon in the entire game. As long as you have a plan for the Swords Dance Absol, he's usually a cakewalk. I've honestly had far more problems with Flannery and Wattson than I've ever had with Sidney. Phoebe is a little harder, but not that much harder. She has a metric crap ton of coverage, but most of her Pokemon hit like wet noodles. Still, it is something you have to go into the fight considering. Her Banets are honestly more threatening than anything else. You'll also have a decent amount of options to pick from while you're constructing your Elite Four team to deal with her. Glacia is pretty tough. Gen 3 might be the best Generation 4 ice types defensively, which is even crazy just saying that out loud. But yeah, there are very few electric type encounters that you get in the game. There's honestly a chance that you get none besides the one you get from New Mauville, which could end up being Electrode, and that's just bad. Grass types won't do out either. Fire won't do anything either. Fighting types as well as rock types are really hard to come by. You will have Brick Break at least before going into the Pokemon League, so that will help a lot. Her Wall Rain is extremely terrifying. Very hard to kill, and it has Sheer Cold. Her second Glalie also has Explosion, and that's always fun in a Nuzlocke. And while her other 3 Pokemon aren't great, they're still annoying. Encore, Hail, Light Screen, Attract, just a bunch of annoyances that make the fight more difficult to navigate. Drake is also very difficult for me to rank because if you have a Walrein, which by the way is a guaranteed encounter in Ruby Sapphire or Emerald, 4 out of the 5 Pokemon he has are just free. Like, they're actually just free. And then the only thing you have to worry about is Kingdra. And this Kingdra is actually worse than Juan's Kingdra for some reason. I'm honestly going to put him at the upper end of average just because you will be able to get plenty of Ice Beam TMs from the game corner at this point as well. And like I said, Walrein is a free encounter basically every single attempt. If you are not using Walrein for some reason, then this fight would definitely be tough. Probably even a run killer. You know what, I'll add him to the lower end of tough just for that reason. I think he deserves that much, but seriously, if you have a Walrein, this fight is way easier. Wallace is a run killer, at least based on my personal experiences with him. He has an extremely well-constructed bulky water team. Water Spout Wailord, Double Team Ludicolo, Dragon Dance Gyarados, Melodic is an absolute beast. He's just got a really tough team. All of his Pokemon are problems, honestly, and depending on how your other Elite Four fights went, you might only have 4 or 5 team members left, and that just makes this even more difficult to navigate. He's really tough to plan ahead for. Finally, I've never done Steven as a boss fight in Emerald before, but if I had to guess, just looking at his team, I would probably say he's a pretty big run killer. Although I'm not sure where within the tier he would be placed. His Metagross is definitely a huge problem. And he's got some other really cool strategies as well. Toxic Spike, Skarmory, Aggron has a ton of coverage, Armaldo is just hard to deal with battle armor. He falls somewhere in here, but I'm not exactly sure where. And that's it for the list. I think that looks about right. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and let me know what other kinds of content you would like to see on the channel in the future. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.